মহারাজা তোমারে সেলাম 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 সেলাম।
This year, the Academy Board of Governors has voted to award an honorary Oscar to the great Indian filmmaker Satyajit Ray. Mr. Ray has been making films for almost 4 decades. The Academy recognizes Mr. Ray's rare mastery of the art of motion pictures and of his profound humanism, which has had an indelible influence on filmmakers and audiences throughout the world. He has said that he aims to capture both what is unique in the Indian experience and that which is universal. Unfortunately, Mr. Ray is not well and cannot be with us tonight, but he is able to speak with us from his hospital room in Calcutta.
Well, it's been an extraordinary experience for me to be here tonight to receive this magnificent award, certainly the best achievement of my movie-making career. As a small schoolboy, I was terribly interested in the cinema, became a film fan, wrote to Deanna Durbin, got a reply, was delighted, wrote to Ginger Rogers, didn't get a reply. Then, of course, I got interested in the cinema as an art form, and I wrote a 12-page letter to Billy Wilder after seeing Double Indemnity. He didn't reply either. Well, there you are. But I have learned everything I've learned about the craft of cinema from the making of American films. I've been watching American films very carefully over the years, and I love them for what they entertained, and then later loved them for what they taught. So I express my gratitude to the American cinema, to the Motion Picture Association, who given me this award and who made me so proud. Thank you very, very much.
To watch any Satyajit Ray movie is to watch meticulous attention to details. To watch his 1963 classic Mahanagar is no different. There is a way to describe my engagement with Ray films, both in my mother tongue Gujarati and the language I naturally slip into, Hindi. There is an expression for my condition. मुझे सत्यजीत रे की लत पड़ी है. एक तरह से बीमारी है जिसका इलाज सिर्फ यही है कि मैं उनकी फिल्में देखता रहूं. Lat is addiction. And when you are addicted to something, you no longer enjoy what you're addicted to. You do it out of a sense of addiction. Of course, I haven't reached that level yet, but sometimes I apprehend that I might. Until that phase arrives, which I hope it doesn't, I think I'm going to thoroughly feel sated in the absolute cinematic brilliance of this master. I'll come to the visual brilliance of Ray's film in a bit, but a few observations first about small, meticulous detailing of the surroundings. In the case of Mahanagar, it's a near claustrophobic home of the Mazumdar family. Apart from the 6 members of the household, there are things everywhere, in every corner, on top of and under everything. One such thing I noticed immediately was a pesticide pump, a bug sprayer, a flit gun, if you will, of the 1950s and 60s and even the 70s that most Indian households had. There were all sorts of bugs to battle then, as now, I suppose. I kept catching the flit gun on top of an almirah in many scenes and thinking about the unspoken rule of dramas that if a prop keeps being visible, there has to come a time when it is used as part of the narrative. It's not a sacrosanct rule, but I'm told that it's normally followed. Although in the case of a movie like this, there are so many things around that you can hardly expect all of them to be used in the narrative. I mean, as home stuff goes, there is so much in the Mozumdar household, but for some reason the flit gun kept nagging me. Sure enough, about 28 minutes into the film, Cephalika Devi, playing Sarojini, starts spraying it around the area where her husband, Priyo Gopal, Haren Chatterjee, sits almost all day. It strangely relieved me that the pump was finally used. Mahanagar is a masterclass in many things that most Satyajit Ray films are. Camera movement, lighting, framing, editing, shots, shot division, production design, and of course, performances. Speaking of performances, it's amazing how uniformly outstanding each one of them is. There is such effortlessness in these performances that barely a few moments into the movie and you forget that you are watching fictional characters in a movie. In this particular case, I would attribute it to Haren Chatterjee playing Priya Gopal, the conservative family patriarch, simply because the film almost opened with him. Every character in the film, even those with a barely discernible presence, looks credible. I have been to Kolkata only once in the 1990s, and during that brief visit I could not help but notice that so many real people there looked like they may have walked straight out of a Ray film. In other words, Ray superbly reflected what he saw around him and then gave them a cinematic edge. Mahanagar's story is about a lower middle class family in the 1950s where the breadwinner, Shubrata, makes just slightly less money than what is needed to maintain lower middle class dignities. They are not exactly hand to mouth, but their hands are often to their mouths, metaphorically. The family patriarch, Priya Gopal, and Sarojini, portrayed superbly by Haren Chatterjee and Cephalika Devi, respectively, loom large over the family without really looming large. The daughter-in-law, Aarti, the ever-fetching Madhavi Mukherjee, is painfully aware of the family's finances because it's her husband, Shubrata, Anil Chatterjee, who earns the money. Anil has a teenage sister, Bani, and a son, Pintu, Prashanjit Sarkar. It's not a poor family, but one which is constantly haunted by the prospects of penury. Being conservative, there are taboos, one of which is that the daughter-in-law must not work, but Aarti has a different idea. As it often happens in Ray films, the intimations of conflict are subtle early on, but not the kind where they acquire the dimensions of a visible upheaval. There are clear hints that penury is at hand. Soon enough, Aarti begins to broach the possibilities of her doing chakri, or a job. There is a quietly humorous scene where in the middle of their sleep she wakes up and insistently talks about chakri. Tumi chao na ami chakri kari? Bolo to? Ki? She importunes. Don't you want me to work? Tell me. What? Eventually she gets a job as a door-to-door saleswoman and in the process appends her family's entrenched ideas about the role of the daughter-in-law. Priya Gopal looks distraught when Shubrata first breaks the news to him. Although Shubrata is supportive in Aarti's ambitions, but just about. One can sense that the veneer of his acceptance is rather thin and can rupture at any time. And it does, as Aarti makes rapid progress as a top performer at her job. She begins to discover a new sense of independence and confidence. As if to illustrate that, Ray introduces a colleague called Edith, an Anglo-Indian played by Ricky Redwood. I presume her anglicized background and Aarti's growing friendship with her are supposed to suggest her rebellious independence from the oppressively humdrum atmosphere at home. An increasingly insecure Shubrata asks her to quit her job, but before that can happen, he loses his, making lives in the Mazumdar household even more troubled. I'm not going to tell you the whole story other than saying that it's a wonderfully nuanced way Ray captures the lower middle class angst of an India barely a few years from her own independence. At the risk of overreading it, Aarti's independence is as hobbled as India's at that point and seems to parallel that. There is a scene where Aarti is leaving home on the first day of her work. In the foreground of the elevated veranda, come kitchen, come dining room, you see her mother-in-law picking up a dirty platter as well as gathering scraps of rice and other food from the floor. In that one powerful juxtaposition, Ray creates a terrific contrast between the lives of the two women, one on the verge of a new independence and the other still trapped in oppressive domesticity. I chose just one film to mark this master's birth anniversary today because it has all the trimmings of his genius. Mahanagar was Ray's first film shot entirely and based in Calcutta, a city that was his muse. Although much of the film unfolds early on within the cloistered apartment of the Mazumdars or offices, you get a feel of the urban setting quite clearly. That brings me to the movie's cinematography by Ray's trusted and longtime collaborator, the legendary Shubrata Mitra. Above all else, I am a visual person. I notice the visible first in any movie and then the auditory next. Mitra, who shot many of Ray's masterpieces, including his first Pather Panchali, does an astonishing job of producing a visual feast in a cramped apartment cluttered with household goods. Of course, he ought to have done it under Ray's expert eye, but still to be able to offer so many vantage points on any scene in such a narrow place speaks to his mastery over the craft, as well as his intuitive understanding of Ray's awe-inspiring sense of cinema. I'm naturally short on verbal flourishes to capture the movie's visual brilliance. All that I can say is Ray and Mitra together create such visual orderliness, even out of ordinary everyday objects in a lower middle class dwelling in an Indian city just after her chaotic independence. There is not a frame out of place, a shot unnecessary. A cinematic economy is imposed without losing any of Ray's well-known cinematic resplendence. In a career spanning nearly 4.5 decades, Ray made 36 films. As his official website points out, Ray also wrote screenplays of all his films, operated the camera, and composed music for most of the films, and many of his films are based on his own stories. Born on May 2, 1921, in what is described as an intellectual and affluent family, where his grandfather Upendra Kishore Ray and father Shukumar Ray were both distinguished artists, writers, painters, illustrators, and musicians, Ray's artistry surpassed the two and did much more himself in terms of the sheer diversity of his skills. It has been nearly 3 decades, 28 years to be precise, since the death on April 23, 1992 of Satyajit Ray. There had not been before him, and there has not been since, an artist of his diverse genius in India. Quite apart from being one of the world's all-time great filmmakers, Ray was an accomplished editor, typographer, illustrator, music composer, costume designer, and writer. In short, he did not need anyone. To my reckoning, he was the only Indian filmmaker with pure, cinematic sensibilities in terms of his short movements and frames. There have been some others, but they do not rise to his league. If you are an admirer of Satyajit Ray, and there are pretty good chances that some of you are, maybe not to the extent of it becoming an ailment as it has in my case, I suggest you watch a 2-minute trailer of his absolutely enchanting The Apu trilogy. There is more cinematic accomplishment in those 2 minutes than most filmmakers would accumulate in a lifetime. And this might be controversial to say, but there is just no filmmaker in India who has achieved even 5% of Ray's visual brilliance.
Maharaja, তোমারে সেলাম 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 খেলাম।
সত্যজিৎ রায় নিয়ে আমার কিছু বলতে চাওয়া বা বলাটাই ধৃষ্টতা, বরং আমি একটা আপনাদের ছোট ঘটনা শোনাই। একটি ছবি, সে ছবির জন্য কলা কুশলী, রেকি ইত্যাদি প্রভৃতি সব শেষ, প্রযোজক প্রস্তুত, শিল্পী তালিকা প্রস্তুত, শিল্পীরা প্রস্তুত। ছবিতে একটা গান ছিল, হাজারে হাজারে হাতিয়ার বুঝি কাটাকুটি করে। এই গানের এই লিরিক্স শুনে প্রযোজক পিছিয়ে আসেন। তার কারণ হচ্ছে যে তার মনে হয়েছিল যে রাজস্থানে শুটিং এবং এই হাতিয়ার মানে হাজার হাজার হাতি তিনি রাজস্থানে যদি নিয়ে যেতে চান, তাহলে তার জন্য যে অর্থ লাগবে সেই অর্থ তিনি লগ্নি করতে পারবেন না, তাই তিনি ছবি থেকে পিছিয়ে আসেন। পরবর্তীকালে 8 বা 9 লক্ষ টাকায় পূর্ণিমা দত্ত এই ছবিটি প্রযোজনা করেন এবং কালজয়ী ছবি একটা হয়। তো দেখা যাচ্ছে যে তাকেও বারংবার নানান কিছুর সম্মুখীন হতে হয়েছে, কিন্তু স্রষ্টা বা সৃষ্টি এভাবেই কি থেমে থাকতে পারে? কখনো কখনো মনে হয় যে না, তাকেও যে বাধাবিঘ্ন পেরোতে হয়েছে, সে পথের পাঁচালী থেকে শুরু করে শেষ পর্যন্ত প্রযোজক পেতে। শুধুমাত্র পুরস্কার দিয়ে প্রযোজক পাওয়া যায় না, কিন্তু তাঁর সৃষ্টি তিনি করে গিয়েছেন এবং যেগুলো ভাঙিয়ে পরবর্তীকালে আমরা স্বপ্ন দেখার সাহস পাই। আজ সেই মানুষটির 103 জন্মদিন, তাকে আমাদের সশ্রদ্ধ প্রণাম।
মহারাজা, তোমারে সেলাম 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 খেলাম।
I'm Rakesh, Anand, Bakshi. I'm an author of a book, Director's Diaries, The Path to Their First Film, Conversations with Filmmakers. And I have featured many most eminent filmmakers in our book. However, I'm yet not an expert on filmmaking and films. I'm still learning, and definitely not an expert on Satyajit Ray Saab. But what I would like to say, just as a common viewer and listener and reader, common person, not as an expert or critic of cinema, is that his films introduced me to rural children. I was born and brought up in a privileged home, in a privileged neighborhood, urban neighborhood. I didn't know what a rural child looks like, how a rural child plays, how a rural child, what kind of food they eat, even if they have food or don't have food. What kind of a mother? I only knew my mother, a privileged person. I learned from his movies what does a rural mother look like, how a rural family lives, how do they play, what are the challenges they face. So that's my learning from Satyajit Ray films. I think everybody of the generation and earlier must watch his movies and discover what India was back then and still is right now in many, many villages. Lots of love. Take care. Bye.
Even if you don't watch an entire film by Ray today, I suggest you watch the 2-minute trailer that I referred to. It's on YouTube. You can find it with Apu Trilogy trailer in the search. If nothing else, those 2 minutes will showcase for you some captivating images from the absolute master of cinema and strains of a famous score by another master, Pandit Ravi Shankar from Pother Panchali. Here is to Satyajit Ray.
মহারাজা তোমারে সেলাম 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 খেলাম